Before we begin tonight's long and soothing tale, I'd like to gently invite you to support A Whispers of Time, a calm corner of the world where soft, relaxing bedtime stories are shared to bring comfort, ease, and rest to weary minds. If you enjoy peaceful journeys into myth, legend, or imagination, consider subscribing. It helps the stories continue and keeps the night warm and quiet. Now, settle in. Let your breath grow softer. Allow your thoughts to drift like gentle waves. Because the tale of Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca, is about to unfold. And though it begins with storm and fire, danger and glory, it will carry you slowly towards sleep. The Odyssey, a retelling part. The storm-bound king. The sea was black the night the storm first rose against him. Not dark like ink or shadow or velvet, but black in the way that only the open ocean can be. A living, breathing thing of swirling depths and furious light, rippling with lightning that carved fleeting shapes across the waves. And in the middle of it, clinging to a shattered mast, salt on his lips and thunder pounding through his bones, was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the man of many turns, the wanderer who had once matched wits with gods. He had known countless nights on countless seas. He had seen storms that cracked the sky open like a shell. He had watched the horizon lift into monstrous walls of water, and had navigated straits so narrow and treacherous that even the bravest sailors whispered prayers before entering them. But never had he faced a storm like this one. For this storm did not come from nature. It came from wrath. Against the trembling sky, Odysseus raised one hand, not to shield himself, not to protest, but simply to feel the rain that lashed against his skin. Every memory, every voice, Lord, but he heard something else beneath it, the low, simmering anger of a god whose pride had been wounded. "Poseidon!" Odysseus murmured, his voice barely audible above the thunder. The sea answered with a wave that lifted him so high the stars seemed within reach, then hurled him down again into the churning deep. He struggled to breathe as the cold enveloped him, dragging him downward like a hand determined to pull him into oblivion. But still he fought, kicking upward, forcing his limbs to move, refusing to surrender. Because that was Odysseus, the man who would not yield, not to armies, not to monsters, not even to gods. When he finally broke the surface, coughing and gasping, lightning illuminated the scattered wreckage around him. Pieces of the raft he had built with his own hands, timber torn apart as though by jaws. He clung to a floating beam and allowed the waves to carry him where they wished, all while the storm raged like a beast trying to shake him loose. He did not speak again. He had said all he needed to. The sea hurled him toward a distant shore, and this moment of fury and fear, of breath nearly lost and hope nearly drowned, was only one small part of the tale. For long before this storm, before Poseidon's rage had grown like a tempest in the heavens, Odysseus had lived a life woven from cunning, courage, and endless longing for home. So let us drift backward now, away from the storm, away from the salt and thunder, to the beginning of his long, winding road. The road that began not with waves, but with war. The war that stole 10 years long ago, before the ocean had marked him, before the gods had set their eyes on him with love and hate alike, Odysseus had knelt on the soil of Ithaca, his homeland, his island of rugged cliffs and olive trees, and made a vow. He had promised to return. But destiny is deaf to promises. Even kings cannot bind. When news came that Helen had been taken from Sparta, dragged away by the Trojan prince Paris, the Greek kings were called to honor the oaths they had sworn. Men from every corner of the Aegean prepared for war. Some went willingly, driven by honor or vengeance. Others went reluctantly, dragged by forces greater than themselves. Odysseus tried not to go at all. He had a newborn son, a loyal wife, a peaceful kingdom. He wanted nothing to do with distant wars sparked by beauty and pride. But kings like Agamemnon do not take refusal lightly, and clever men like Odysseus cannot hide behind tricks forever. His attempt to feign madness, ploughing a field with ox and horse yoked together, sowing salt instead of seed, had nearly succeeded. Nearly. Until Palamedes placed young Telemachus in front of the plough. Odysseus had stopped instantly. Madmen do not stop for children. And so his fate was sealed. He left Ithaca with a heavy heart, boarded his ship, and joined the vast armada that blackened the sea as it moved toward Troy. 10 years he fought there, among heroes whose names were destined for legend. Achilles, swift and unstoppable. Ajax, towering and fierce. Diomedes, favored by Athena, and so many others whose blood would stain the sands of the foreign shore. Odysseus's contributions were not measured by brute strength, though he was strong, but by wisdom. He devised strategies, built alliances, unraveled riddles, and navigated feuds that threatened to tear the Greek forces apart. Yet the war dragged on and on, immortalized by the stubborn pride of kings, until the day Odysseus offered one final idea: a hollow horse, a gift to Troy, a trap. Storytellers would later call it brilliant. Poets would call it divine inspiration. But Odysseus knew better. It was simply the final move in a long, bloody game, a game he had grown weary of. Troy fell, its towers burned, its people scattered or slain. And when the dust settled and the screams faded, nothing remained but ruin. The Greeks sailed home, or tried to. For while the war had taken 10 years, the journey home for Odysseus would take 10 more. The homeward wind first set sail from Troy. He believed the worst was behind him. His ships were sturdy, his men loyal, his provisions plentiful. The sea, for a time, was calm. The wind brushed his sails like a kindly hand guiding him home. They celebrated on the decks with wine and stories. They spoke of reunions, of wives and children, of warm hearths and familiar harbours. Even Odysseus allowed himself a rare moment of ease. And then came the land of the Cicones. Had they simply taken resources and left, all might have gone well. But Odysseus's men, flushed with victory and thirsty for plunder, stayed too long, celebrating their triumph. The Cicones rallied reinforcements, and a brutal battle ensued. Many Greeks fell. Odysseus buried them with his own hands before forcing his remaining men back onto their ships. From that moment forward, he trusted no moment of safety. And the gods, oh, the gods were watching. Some favored him, some despised him, toyed with him. But the first true turn of fate came not from hostility, but from kindness. The island of the Lotus Eaters was peaceful, its people gentle, its shores warm and quiet. But the fruit they offered, sweet, soft, and fragrant, was a trap woven not from malice, but forgetfulness. Those who tasted it lost all desire to return home. They drifted through the days in smiling stupor, thinking only of the next delicious bite. When Odysseus found his men lounging among the blossoms, their eyes glazed with bliss, he dragged them back to the ships by force. Their protests were soft and dreamlike. They begged to stay. But Odysseus bound them to the benches and ordered his crew to row until the island disappeared. Beyond that island lay countless others, each with its own danger, its own lesson, its own mark upon his heart. And the next mark would be carved by a giant. The cave of the Cyclops. When Odysseus and his men approached the island of the Cyclopes, they saw no walls, no harbors, no cities, only wild, rocky land dotted with enormous sheep. They should have turned away. Every instinct in Odysseus's mind whispered caution. But curiosity is a powerful force. And Odysseus had always been a curious man. He chose a group of 12 companions and ventured inland, arriving at the mouth of a cave so large a ship could fit inside. Inside were racks of cheese, pens of young goats and lambs, and signs of a shepherd who lived alone. The men begged to take food and depart. But Odysseus insisted on waiting for the owner, a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. The shepherd returned at dusk, driving his massive flock before him. He was Polyphemus, the Cyclops, a giant with a single eye in the center of his brow, and a temper as vast as the boulder he rolled across the cave's entrance, sealing them inside. When he discovered strangers in his home, he did not greet them. He reached out, seized 2 men, and crushed them against the stone floor. Then he ate them, casually, like a man eating olives with his supper. The others froze in horror. Odysseus forced himself to stay calm. If they killed the Cyclops, the boulder would trap them forever. If they did nothing, Polyphemus would eat them all. So he devised a plan. He offered the Cyclops wine, strong, dark, and potent, a gift the giant gulped down eagerly. As the Cyclops grew drunk, Odysseus told him his name. "My name is Nobody." Polyphemus laughed until the cave trembled. Then he collapsed into sleep. Odysseus and his men heated a sharpened stake in the fire until it glowed red, then drove it into the Cyclops' eye. His roar shook the island. Other Cyclopes rushed to the cave, calling out to ask who was hurting him. "Nobody is hurting me," Polyphemus screamed. And so they left. Blinded and raging, the Cyclops moved the boulder at dawn to let his flock out, feeling each sheep's back to guard against escape. But Odysseus and his men clung to the undersides of the animals and slipped past him. They raced to their ships and pushed off from the shore. They were safe, until Odysseus made a single mistake. As they sailed away, he cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted back, "If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca." The Cyclops roared not in pain this time, but in triumph, for Polyphemus was the son of Poseidon, and from that moment on, the god of the sea pursued Odysseus with endless fury. The island of Aeolus. Their next stop offered hope. Aeolus, keeper of the winds, welcomed them generously. He fed them, honored them, and listened to Odysseus's tale. Then, moved by pity, he gave Odysseus a leather sack bound with silver, a sack containing every wind except the gentle west wind that would carry them home. "Guard this well," Iolaus said. "It will take you safely to Ithaca." And for 9 days Odysseus did. He did not sleep, steering his ship tirelessly, watching Ithaca grow closer and closer on the horizon. But on the 10th day, exhaustion overcame him. He slept, and while he slept, his men, thinking the sack held treasure, opened it. The winds burst free like furious spirits. A hurricane swept the ships away, tearing them from the very doorstep of home and hurling them back toward Iolaus's island. Desperate, Odysseus begged Iolaus for help again. But the keeper of the winds recoiled in fear. "Your journey is cursed," he said, "and I will not aid a man hated by the gods." Odysseus left in silence. Lastrygonians, the giant cannibals. From Iolaus's rejection, the fleet sailed into darker fate. They arrived at a harbor surrounded by cliffs, a place so calm and sheltered it seemed a blessing. But it was a trap. The Lastrygonians, giants larger even than Polyphemus, descended upon them with boulders and spear-sized stakes. Ship after ship shattered under the assault. Men screamed, scrambling for safety that did not exist. Only one ship escaped, Odysseus's own. The rest were lost, swallowed by giant hands and crushing waters. Odysseus sailed on with a heart now hollowed by grief. The enchantress Circe. The island of Aiaia was beautiful. Sunlit forests rustled with warm breezes, birds sang from emerald branches, and the air smelled of sweet herbs. But beauty is not always kindness, and soft breezes often hide sharp claws. Here lived Circe, the enchantress. When Odysseus sent half his remaining men to scout, they found her palace of polished stone and tame wolves. She welcomed them with food and wine laced with spells. As they drank, she raised her gleaming wand and turned them into pigs. One man escaped and ran back to Odysseus, trembling with terror. Odysseus went alone to rescue them. On the path, he met Hermes, the messenger god, who gave him a sacred herb called moly, white-flowered with a black root. "It will protect you from her magic," Hermes said, "but your wit must do the rest." Armed with herb and courage, Odysseus entered Circe's hall. She offered him the same enchanted wine. He drank without fear. When she attempted to transform him, the spell failed. He drew his sword. Circe gasped and knelt. She offered him a truce. For a year, Odysseus lived on her island, resting, healing, gathering strength. His men were restored to human form. The meals were rich, the nights peaceful, and Circe herself grew fond of the wandering king. Yet Odysseus's heart remained bound to Ithaca. When at last he asked to leave, Circe agreed, but warned that the path ahead required something no mortal should endure. He must sail to the land of the dead. Only there, from the shade of the prophet Tiresias, could he learn the way home. And so, for the first time in his life, Odysseus prepared to descend into a world where the living do not belong. The journey to the land of the dead. The wind that carried Odysseus away from Circe's island was colder than any he had felt before. It slipped through the sails like a ghost, ushering the ship not toward warmth or harbor, or any place meant for mortal men, but toward a horizon that seemed to darken with every passing hour. Even the strongest of his crew felt unease pressing at their hearts, though none voiced it aloud. They had seen the enchantress smile. They had eaten her food. They had rested in her halls and slept in soft beds after years of battle and wandering. Yet the moment they pushed away from her island, dread settled over them. For Circe had told them the truth clearly, with no spell nor riddle to soften the blow. To return home, they must first pass through death. Odysseus stood at the prow, watching the sea flatten into a disturbing stillness. No gulls circled overhead, no dolphins danced near the bow. The air itself felt thin, as though the world were holding its breath. His hands gripped the wood so tightly, his knuckles whitened. He had faced countless dangers, but none quite like this. Men can fight monsters. They can outwit giants. They can even survive the wrath of a god for a time. But how does a man face death and return? Still, Odysseus pressed onward. He had never been one to turn back once a path was chosen, even if that path led to a place where no sunlight reached. As dusk bled into night, the water darkened into a hue deeper than ink. Stars flickered overhead like distant sparks, but even their gentle glow seemed swallowed by the growing void around them. When the ship finally scraped against gravel instead of waves, a shiver ran through the crew. They had arrived. The land of the Cimmerians, the threshold to the underworld, was a place without dawn. A fog hung low across the rocky shore, grey and shifting like the breath of spirits. The cold bit deep. Every sound, even the crunch of pebbles beneath their feet, echoed strangely, as though the world were hollow. Odysseus carried a black lamb and a young goat, as Circe instructed, along with a bronze blade. Behind him his men followed, reluctant but loyal, clutching torches whose flames sputtered uncertainly in the chill air. He found the spot Circe had described, a shallow pit near a stream whose water was darker than night. There he raised the knife, whispered the ancient words, and performed the ritual that opened the boundary between life and death. Blood touched the ground, and the world changed. The gathering of shadows. At first, the only sound was the river's steady, mournful flow. But then came a whisper, and another, and another. Soon the air trembled with soft rustlings, the footfalls of those who no longer truly walked, the murmurings of mouths that had forgotten breath. Shadows gathered. Pale forms drifted toward the pit, drawn by the scent of blood, their shapes wavering like smoke. Some were merely outlines, the faint suggestion of bodies long forgotten by the living. Others were clearer, though their faces were hollow, their eyes dim with hunger, not for food or drink, but for memory, for connection, for the warmth they once knew. Odysseus felt his heart seize. Among them were warriors, spears still in hand, armor cracked by fatal blows. There were maidens, their hair floating around them like ghostly veils. There were elders, stooped and trembling, despite the fact that no true bones remained to support them. They reached toward the blood-filled pit with clawing fingers, desperate to drink, desperate to speak, desperate to be remembered. Odysseus lifted his blade, warning them back. "Not yet," he murmured. "Not until Tiresias comes." But the dead do not listen easily. They surged forward as a tide of whispers and sighs, but Odysseus stood firm, his will as sharp as the blade he held. His men trembled behind him, torches flickering wildly. Then a new figure emerged, one he recognized. The ghost of Elpenor. Elpenor, the youngest of Odysseus's crew, stepped forward with empty eyes and a bowed head. The memory hit Odysseus hard. Elpenor had died only days before, on Circe's island, a foolish, tragic death. After drinking too much wine, he had slept on the roof of the palace, and upon waking suddenly, had stumbled over the edge. His neck had snapped instantly. There had been no time to bury him, no chance to honor him properly. Now he stood before them, sorrow woven into his ghostly features. "Odysseus, my captain," he whispered, voice like wind through reeds. "You left me unburied." Odysseus bowed his head, weighed by guilt. "I did not know," he said softly. "Forgive me, Elpenor. When I return to the world of the living, I will bury you with honor, with fire and stone and mourning. You will not be forgotten." At those words the shade of Elpenor seemed to soften. Gratitude flickered faintly across his ethereal face. Slowly he drifted back into the crowd of spirits, and still the pit waited. The blood gleamed darkly. At last the spirit they sought arrived, Tiresias, the prophecy of Tiresias. Unlike the other shades, Tiresias appeared with clarity and purpose. His form did not flicker. His presence was steady, the air shifting around him as though making room for a truth older than the world. When he approached the pit, Odysseus stepped back respectfully, lowering his blade. Tiresias dipped his hands into the blood and drank, and in that moment his hollow face brightened with understanding. The prophet's voice rose, rich and resonant, cutting through the murmur of countless spirits. "Odysseus, son of Laertes," he said, "you seek the road home. But the sea you travel is not guided by winds alone. It is shaped by fate. And by your own choices." Odysseus listened, breath held. "You angered Poseidon," Tiresias continued, "and he will not rest until you have suffered greatly. Yet even so, you may reach Ithaca, if you resist temptation." The prophet's expression darkened. "Beware the island of Helios. His sacred cattle are not for mortal hands. If you or your men harm them, disaster will fall. But if you endure, if you master hunger and desperation, you may yet return." Odysseus nodded solemnly. Tiresias leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Even when you reach home, your trials will not end. Others have taken your halls. Suitors feast on your wealth. They seek your wife's hand, but you will reclaim what is yours, through cunning, not force." The shadows thickened around them, restless, murmuring. "And know this," Tiresias said finally, "when your enemies lie defeated and peace returns to Ithaca, you must undertake one more journey. You must walk inland until a traveler mistakes an oar for a winnowing fan. There you must sacrifice to Poseidon. Only then will your trials end." Odysseus accepted the prophecy, not with joy, not with despair, but with the iron resolve of a man who has no choice but to continue. "Thank you," he said. But Tiresias's form had already begun to dissolve into mist. The spirit of his mother. No prophecy, however grim, could prepare Odysseus for the next shadow that came to the pit. His mother. Anticlea stepped forward with gentle steps, her face pale but familiar, painfully familiar. The sight struck Odysseus with a force greater than any blow he had suffered in battle. He had not known she died. He had left Ithaca when she was alive, well, and waiting for his return. A single breath escaped him, trembling. "Mother," he whispered. Her eyes were filled with infinite sadness. "My son," she murmured. "My clever, wandering child. How long I waited for you. How many nights I prayed to see you again." Odysseus reached for her, but his hand passed through her like mist. The shock of it chilled his blood. She smiled sadly. "The living cannot hold the dead," she said softly, "but you can listen." She told him of Ithaca's struggles, of Penelope's unwavering loyalty, of Telemachus growing from infant to troubled young man. She told him how her heart had grown heavy with worry, how grief had consumed her when no word came from Troy, and how, at last, she succumbed to sorrow. Odysseus wept, silently, shoulders shaking, tears falling onto the cold ground. "Do not grieve," she whispered. "I am at peace. But you must return home. Your wife waits. Your son needs you." Then she stepped back, fading into the crowd of shadows. The fallen heroes. More shades came, so many that Odysseus felt overwhelmed, as though the weight of every life lost in the war had followed him here. There was Agamemnon, once a mighty king, now hollow-eyed and bitter, murdered in his own home by his wife and her lover. He warned Odysseus to trust no one upon his return. There was Achilles, shining even in death, yet filled with regret. "I would rather be a slave alive," he said, "than a king among the dead." His words echoed painfully in the cold air. There were others, Patroclus, Ajax, countless warriors whose names had once shaken the earth. But the dead grew restless. They surged closer, hungry for life, for memory, for the pulse they no longer possessed. Odysseus felt the darkness tightening around him. The air grew thin, the torches sputtered, his men trembled. Enough. It was time to leave. He stepped back, drawing his blade in warning, and the shades hissed, swirling like smoke caught in a gale. With desperate haste, Odysseus and his men returned to the ship, pushing it into the water with trembling hands. They did not look back, for the dead do not like to be denied. Return to the living world. When the ship finally broke free of that cursed coastline, when the water beneath them brightened from black to blue, when the sun touched their skin again, the men collapsed onto the deck in exhausted relief. Odysseus alone remained standing, staring at the horizon. The underworld had changed him. He felt older, heavier, more fragile in some ways, stronger in others. But within his heart burned a single, unwavering truth. He would return to Ithaca, no matter the storms, no matter the monsters, no matter the gods who stood against him. His journey was far from over, and his next trials would test every part of him. His patience, his courage, his cunning, and the loyalty of the men who still followed him. Behind them lay death. Ahead lay sirens, monsters, whirlpools, temptation, starvation, betrayal. and a destiny that tightened around him like an invisible net. But Odysseus lifted his chin, breathed deeply, and gave the order to sail on. The winds obeyed, the sea stirred, and the next chapter of his struggle began, the sirens and the edge of madness. For many days after leaving the land of the dead, the sea seemed unusually gentle, as though it pitied the weary men who sailed across its glimmering surface. The waves rose and fell like the slow breathing of a sleeping giant, and the ship cut through them with almost no effort. Even the sky seemed to offer a fragile peace. Bright dawns, soft sunsets, and nights scattered with stars that shimmered like faint promises of home. But Odysseus trusted none of it. Calm seas often come before storms, and the gods, fickle in their moods, were rarely content to leave him undisturbed for long. He stood often at the prow, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the shifting horizon. He knew what lay ahead, not from prophecy, but from the words Circe had whispered on the final night before his departure. "First," she had said, "you will meet the sirens." Even now, the memory tightened his jaw. Circe had explained that these beings, part woman, part something older, darker, more unknowable, sang songs woven from desire and dreams. No mortal could resist them. Those who heard their voices abandoned reason, steering their ships toward the melody until they shattered upon the jagged rocks that hid below the surface. "No man returns," she warned him, "not unless he stops his ears or binds himself." So as the wind carried them closer to the haunted waters, Odysseus gathered his men and spoke with solemn authority. "My friends," he said, "our journey now takes us past the sirens. Their song can ensnare any heart. So you must take wax softened by fire and place it in your ears." The men exchanged uneasy glances. They trusted their captain, but the very idea of a supernatural voice that could steal their minds unsettled them deeply. "And you, my lord," asked Perimedes, one of the more steadfast sailors, "will you also stop your ears?" Odysseus shook his head. "No, I must hear their song, not from desire, but from knowledge. I wish to understand what has lured so many to ruin, but I will take precautions." He told them to bind him to the mast hands, feet, chest so tightly that not even a god's whisper could loosen the ropes. And under no circumstance, he warned, were they to free him until the ship had passed safely out of range. His men obeyed reluctantly. Soon, as the sun dipped low and the sea darkened into violet, the ragged outline of an island appeared ahead, an island ringed with rocks that jutted from the water like the teeth of a buried beast. An unsettling stillness enveloped them. The wind fell silent. The ship drifted as though guided by invisible hands. Then the singing began. The song of the sirens. It was not what Odysseus had expected. He had imagined something wild, something sharp, something seductive in a way that clawed at the senses. But the siren's song was soft-achingly soft-like. Warm honey poured into the soul. It was beautiful beyond reason, so beautiful that the world seemed to dim around it. The voices blended seamlessly, rising and falling in perfect harmony, promising everything a man could yearn for. "Odysseus, son of Laertes, come to us." The sound wrapped around him like a warm cloak. His breath caught. His heart surged. Every muscle in his body strained against the ropes. He could not think. He could not reason. Every memory of danger evaporated like mist under the sun. All he heard was the truth he felt in their voices. They understood him. They saw him. They knew his struggles, his pain, his losses, his hopes. Come, hear our wisdom. We know all things, the suffering you carry, the glory you seek. He shouted to his men, begged, pleaded, demanded that they release him. His voice cracked with desperation. He cursed them, swore rewards, threatened them with punishments, promised riches beyond imagination. He pulled so hard against the ropes that his skin burned and bled. But his men only rode harder, unaware of his screams, their ears sealed with wax. The Siren's island glided past, slowly, painfully slowly, the melody reaching into his chest like a hand trying to pluck out his heart. And as they drifted out of range, the song shifted, no longer. Sweet but desperate, angry, mournful. "Odysseus! Odysseus!" The voices grew faint, then silent. At last, when the island was a distant shape against the horizon, his men stopped rowing, removed the wax from their ears, and freed him. Odysseus slumped against the mast, exhausted, shaken, humbled. He had survived, but not without scars in his mind where the song had carved its mark. Silently, they sailed onward. Scylla and Charybdis. The respite was brief. Soon another challenge loomed. One Circe had described with grave seriousness. A pair of horrors guarding a narrow strait no wider than 100 yards. "To one side," she warned, "lurks Scylla, a creature with 12 feet and 6 serpent heads, each with 3 rows of fangs. She lives upon a cliff, snatching sailors from the decks of passing ships. To the other side lies Charybdis, a monstrous whirlpool that swallows the sea 3 times a day. If you sail too close, she will drag your ship into the abyss." The choice, Circe had said, was not whether to face death, but which form it should take. As Odysseus approached the dreaded passage, he gathered his men again. "There is no safe path," he told them, trying to keep his voice steady. "But we must choose Scylla. If we sail too near Charybdis, none of us will survive." He did not tell them everything. He did not explain that Scylla would take 6 lives, unavoidable and immediate, while Charybdis might take them all. He carried that burden alone. Leadership often demanded such silent cruelty. He ordered his men to row with all their strength and reminded them not to look toward Scylla's cliff. Then he armed himself, though Circe had insisted that weapons were useless against the monster. Still, a man fights even when he knows victory is impossible. The ship glided into the strait. The cliffs rose sharply on both sides, towering above them like ancient hungry gods. The current tugged at the hull. Spray stung their faces. Then came the roar of Charybdis. It was the sound of the sea tearing itself apart, deep, guttural, monstrous. Waves spun violently, twisting into a great churning mouth that drank the ocean in massive gulps. The ship veered, the men gasping, straining against the oars. "Pull!" Odysseus shouted. "Pull with everything you have!" They fought the current, muscles burning. Sweat dripped from their brows. The whirlpool gurgled and snarled, inches from pulling them in. And then a scream. One of the crew, then another. Odysseus's blood froze. Scylla. He turned just in time to see her serpent heads descending, jaws wide, teeth gleaming wetly. In a single heartbeat, 6 men, among the strongest and bravest, were plucked from the deck, limbs flailing, voices raw with terror. Odysseus roared and swung his sword, but the heads were faster snapping back toward the cliff with their prey. And as the cries of the taken men echoed through the strait, Odysseus felt a wave of guilt so heavy it nearly crushed him. But the ship lived, the rest of the men lived, and soon the strait was behind them. No one spoke, not for many hours. The air itself seemed to mourn. The island of the sun god. When land finally appeared again, the men rejoiced. They believed the gods had granted them relief at last. Odysseus did not. He recognized the place instantly from Tiresias's prophecy, from Circe's warning. The island belonged to Helios, the sun god, whose sacred cattle grazed on the lush meadows beyond the shore. No mortal was to harm those cattle, not a single hair. Odysseus called his men together. "We must not land here," he insisted. "We must pass by. This place is forbidden." But fatigue clouded their faces. Starvation gnawed at their bellies. Storm winds had battered them for days, driving them toward this very shore. "Captain," Eurylochus argued, "we will die if we do not rest. Just one night. Let us anchor. We will not touch the cattle. I swear it." Odysseus hesitated. He knew danger. He smelled it in the wind, felt it in his bones. But he also knew the limits of human endurance. His men could sail no farther. So he relented reluctantly. And they anchored. Odysseus made them swear again, every one of them, that they would avoid the sacred herd. Then the storms came. A furious gale rose overnight, as though Poseidon himself tore at the sky. The winds lasted day after day, trapping them on the island, draining their provisions, weakening their will. Odysseus prayed for guidance. His men searched desperately for anything edible, roots, birds, even insects. Hunger became a living thing among them, gnawing and impatient. And one night, when Odysseus wandered away to pray alone, Eurylochus led the others into the meadow. The curse of Helios. They killed the cattle, not out of malice, not out of greed, but out of a desperate, maddening hunger. Odysseus returned to the smell of roasting meat, his heart sinking before he even reached the fire. He shouted, raged, but the deed was done. For 7 days they feasted, and the gods watched. When they finally set sail again, the sea was unnaturally calm, as though waiting. Then the sky split open. Thunder roared, lightning raged. The winds screamed with divine fury. A massive bolt struck the ship, shattering the mast, igniting the deck. One by one, the men were swallowed by the waves, pulled into the depths, their cries lost beneath the roar of the storm. Only Odysseus survived. Clinging to broken timbers, battered by waves, he drifted for days until the sea spat him onto a lonely shore. The island of Calypso, the prison of a goddess. Calypso was immortal, radiant, powerful, enchanting. She found Odysseus half dead on her beach and nursed him back to life. Her island was paradise. Gentle breezes, warm sands, abundant food, and a peace deeper than any he had known in years. Calypso loved him. She offered him comfort. She offered him rest. She offered him eternity. "If you stay," she promised, I will make you immortal. You will never grow old, never suffer, never face death. Stay with me, Odysseus. Be my companion for all time. It was a temptation unlike any other. After so many years of hardship, who would not long for peace? Yet Odysseus's heart remained tethered to Ithaca. Every night he stood on the beach, staring toward the horizon, longing for Penelope, for Telemachus, for home. 7 years passed, 7 years of gentle imprisonment, of internal war between desire and duty. And then, at last, the gods intervened. Hermes descended to Calypso's island and commanded her to release him. Enraged, heartbroken, but bound by divine decree, she agreed. She helped Odysseus build a raft and stocked it with supplies. Odysseus set sail once more. And that is where the Poseidon smashed his raft, where the black waves swallowed him and tossed him nearly to death, and where the tale began, with Odysseus clinging to shattered wood in a furious sea. His journey was not over, but his path was turning. Ahead lay the land of the Phaeacians, a final trial, a final gift. And then, at long last, Ithaca, the shores of the Phaeacians. When the sea finally spat Odysseus onto land, he did not feel triumph. He felt sand in his mouth, salt in his lungs, and a dragging exhaustion that settled into every bone like lead. He lay motionless for a long while, waves lapping gently against his legs, as though the sea, having nearly killed him, now tried to apologize with soft caresses. The sky above him was quiet. The storm had passed as suddenly as it had come, leaving behind a luminous blue much too serene to reveal the violence that had consumed him only hours earlier. Seabirds circled overhead, crying softly, their wings glinting in the sun. At last, Odysseus forced himself to rise. His body trembled, his limbs burned, but his spirit, though battered, remained unbroken. He surveyed the unfamiliar land, lush grass, whispering reeds, and a grove of poplars and olives that offered shade from the sun's growing heat. This was the island of the Phaeacians. Though Odysseus did not yet know its name, he stumbled toward the grove and collapsed at the base of a broad olive tree. Sleep thick, sweet, irresistible, pulled him under. And for the first time in a long while, his dreams were gentle. The Princess Nausicaa. While Odysseus slept, life on the island moved peacefully. The Phaeacians were a people blessed by the gods, especially by Poseidon. Though ironically, this did Odysseus no favor. Their cities gleamed with marble. Their ships glided across the sea, as though guided by thought alone. Their lives were woven from music, dance, and feasts beneath starlit skies. It was in this quiet kingdom that Nausicaa, the daughter of King Alcinous and Queen Arete, rose one morning with a dream lingering in her mind. A dream sent by Athena. In it, the goddess whispered that Nausicaa should wash her clothes by the river, an errand that in royal households was normally left to servants. But the goddess encouraged her to go herself, hinting that her destiny might soon be unfolding. Nausicaa, graceful and bright-eyed, gathered her maidens and a mule-drawn cart filled with linens. Together, they walked to the river near the grove where Odysseus slept. The air was warm, the water cool and clear, and laughter soon filled the banks as the young women splashed each other playfully. When their chores were finished, and their clothes hung on sunlit rocks to dry, the girls began tossing a ball, their laughter ringing through the trees. A sharp throw sent the ball flying into the grove. Their startled cries echoed, and Odysseus awoke. He sat up slowly, blinking away sleep. He was naked, bruised, and salt-stained. His beard was wild. His hair clung to his face in tangled strands. He looked more like a beggar washed ashore by chance than a king who had once stood before Troy's highest walls. The moment the maidens saw him, they screamed and fled. All except Nausicaa. Fear flickered across her face, but courage held firm. Athena had wrapped her in quiet strength. Odysseus rose carefully, covering himself with a leafy branch. Then, choosing his words with care, he spoke, his voice rough but steady. "Lady," he said, "I am no threat. I am a man battered by storms, a wanderer seeking kindness. I beg you, not for gold, nor garments, nor favor, but simply for guidance and mercy." Nausicaa studied him with calm intelligence. She noted his manner, his eloquence, the unmistakable glow of suffering endured. "You speak with wisdom," she said softly, "and wisdom does not belong to rogues. Come, I will help you." With quiet composure, she instructed her maidens to bring him clothes and oil for bathing. Odysseus washed himself in the river until the grime of sea and hardship lifted from his skin. He dressed in the fine garments they offered. When he stepped from the river, clean and upright, he looked almost regal again, not fully a king, but no longer a wretched castaway. Nausicaa could not hide her admiration, yet she maintained decorum, careful not to stir gossip. "Follow behind our cart," she instructed. "When we reach the city, stop at my father's palace and seek my mother, Queen Arete. If anyone can help you find your way home, it is she." And so Odysseus followed, walking through the golden fields of the Phaeacians toward a fate that would bring him closer, so much closer to Ithaca, the palace of Alcinous. The palace of King Alcinous was unlike any Odysseus had seen. Its walls shimmered with polished bronze. Golden doors gleamed in the sunlight. Inside, silver dogs crafted by Hephaestus himself stood guard living statues that glowed with divine artistry. Odysseus entered quietly, guided by Athena, who cloaked him in a subtle mist so that none would see him before the time was right. He knelt before Queen Arete, who sat weaving beneath a tall pillar of polished stone. When the mist faded, the court gasped. A stranger stood among them, a noble, weary figure, clothed in garments that bore the unmistakable handiwork of their own household. Queen Arete saw this first. "Where did you get those clothes?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Odysseus bowed deeply. "Your daughter found me by the river, my queen. Had she not offered aid, I would still lie upon the shore, broken. Her kindness saved my life." A murmur passed through the hall. King Alcinous rose, his expression warm and thoughtful. "Stranger," he said, "we are a people guided by hospitality. No man who seeks shelter here shall want for comfort. Join us at our table. When you are rested, tell us your story." So Odysseus ate real food, warm bread, tender meats, wine as sweet as morning fruit. His body revived, his spirit expanded, and when the final cup was drained, he spoke. Not yet revealing his name, he told them of storms, of monsters, of shipwreck, of wandering. The court listened with rapt attention. That night, a feast was held in his honor, complete with songs, dances, and competitions of strength and skill. The bard Demodocus sang of heroes and gods, his voice carrying through the hall like a sacred wind. But when he began the tale of the Trojan War, of the wooden horse, of the cunning that brought a great city to ruin, Odysseus wept, silently at first, then openly, his face buried in his cloak. The hall fell still. Alcinous approached gently. "Stranger," he said, "no ordinary traveler weeps at a bard's song. Tell us your name, so we may honor you properly." Odysseus lifted his head, and at last he spoke the words he had withheld for so long. "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca, the man of many wiles." A stunned silence followed. Then cheers erupted. They knew that name. All the world knew that name. King Alcinous raised his hands for silence. "Odysseus," he proclaimed, "tomorrow we will give you a ship, our finest. It will bear you home, swiftly and safely." For the first time in 10 long years, the promise of Ithaca felt real. The tale of his wanderings, before they granted him passage, the Phaeacians asked Odysseus to recount his entire journey. They wished to understand how a man so mighty had endured so many trials. And so, sitting amidst golden torches and sweet incense, Odysseus spoke. He told of the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops Polyphemus, Iolus and the Winds, the Laestrygonian giants, Circe and her enchantments, the land of the dead, the Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, the sun god's wrath, and Calypso's lonely paradise. The Phaeacians listened with wide eyes and trembling hearts. Their queen wiped a tear from her cheek. Their king nodded solemnly. Their children stared at Odysseus with awe, imagining him as a figure carved from heroic legend. When he finished, silence settled like a soft cloak over the hall. Then King Alcinous declared, "Odysseus, no man has endured what you have endured, and no man deserves home more. Tomorrow you will sail." That night Odysseus slept in a soft bed beneath embroidered linens. Dreams of Ithaca filled his mind, olive trees swaying, goats calling from rocky cliffs, Penelope weaving at her loom, Telemachus standing tall and grown. His heart ached with longing, but not with despair. For the first time in years, the ache carried hope. The voyage home. At dawn, the Phaeacians prepared the ship, a sleek, swift vessel unlike any Odysseus had ever seen. Its prow was shaped like a bird in flight. Its hull gleamed like polished pearl. The sailors loaded chests of gold, fine garments, and gifts fit for a king. "Odysseus," King Alcinous said, "these treasures are yours. May they replace all that has been stolen from you." The queen blessed him. Nausicaa wished him a gentle farewell, her voice soft but steady. "I hope you find your wife," she said, "and that she welcomes you as warmly as I would have." Odysseus smiled with gratitude. "You will always have my thanks. May the gods grant you a husband worthy of your grace." Then he boarded the ship. As they pushed away from shore, a warm wind curled around the sails. The ship glided forward, not rowing, not struggling, but almost drifting on a divine breeze. The sailors sang softly. The air grew warm. The sea hummed beneath the hull. Odysseus lay upon a soft bed, exhaustion embracing him like an old friend. The gentle sway of the ship lulled him towards sleep. His last thought before drifting off was a single word: home. And while he slept, the Phaeacian vessel carried him across the sea with unnatural speed, its enchanted craft slicing through waves like a silent arrow. Before dawn's first light, the ship approached a rugged coastline, a place of rocky cliffs, deep forests, and quiet coves. Ithaca. His Ithaca. The treachery of Poseidon. When the sailors lifted Odysseus from the deck, still slumbering peacefully, they placed him gently upon the shore. They arranged his treasures around him with care, making sure every gift was safe. Then they boarded their ship to return home. But Poseidon watched. He had seen his mortal enemy Odysseus, the man who blinded his son, finally reach home through the aid of the Phaeacians, and the god of the sea felt a surge of deep, vengeful wrath. "These mortals defy me," he growled. "They ferry my enemy without fear of my storms." He raised his trident. The sea churned. A great wave struck the Phaeacian ship, turning wood to stone in an instant. The vessel froze mid-water, then sank straight down to the ocean floor. The Phaeacians would survive as a people, but their enchanted ships would sail no more. The era of effortless voyages was over. Poseidon's vengeance was swift and final. Awakening. As dawn brushed Ithaca's cliffs with gold, Odysseus stirred. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. At first he did not recognize the shore. 10 years of wandering had blurred the memory of home. But then, the scent of olive trees, the shape of the mountains, the cry of goats in the distance, the whisper of leaves in a familiar breeze. It was real. He had returned. Odysseus dropped to his knees, tears filling his eyes. He pressed his hands to the earth, his earth feeling its rough warmth beneath his palms. "After so long," he whispered. "After so many trials." But fate had not finished with him. His home was no longer his alone. His halls were filled with enemies. His wife was besieged by suitors, and his son lived under threat. Odysseus rose slowly, determination sharpening his gaze. The final battle awaited. The hidden king of Ithaca. Odysseus stood upon the rocky shore of Ithaca, as though waking from a dream. The morning sun shimmered faintly across the waves. The wind carried buried scents, olive groves warmed by daylight, sheep grazing on high slopes, distant hearth fires, and the faint perfume of wild herbs crushed beneath wandering hooves. These were the smells of his childhood, his kingdom, his blood. And yet, the land felt strangely unfamiliar. 10 years of absence had wrapped his memories in a thin haze, like mist over a still lake. He looked up at the rugged hills rising before him, their shapes both intimate and ghostly. He listened to the bleating of goats, the rustle of wind through olive branches. He touched the soil with reverence, pressing it between his fingers. "This is Ithaca," he murmured. "But Ithaca has changed, and so have I." He turned to look at the treasure-laden chests the Phaeacians had left beside him. Gifts of gold, fine cloth, vessels of silver, weapons forged by master craftsmen. More wealth than he had possessed even before the war. But wealth would not save him now. He needed secrecy, caution, and the help of the gods. At that moment, as if summoned by thought alone, the air shimmered. The breeze stilled. A soft radiance gathered near the roots of a gnarled olive tree. Then the shape of a woman stepped forth, tall, poised, fierce-eyed. Athena, his protector, his silent ally through countless trials. She stood before him now in the form of a simple shepherd girl, staff in hand, but her gaze held the depth of the heavens. Odysseus bowed deeply. "My goddess, you have returned to me." She smiled, warm, proud, almost tender. "Clever, Odysseus," she said. "At last your long journey has brought you home, but do not rejoice too quickly." "I know," he replied, jaw tightening. "The suitors." Athena nodded. "Your halls are infested by men who devour your wealth, insult your household, and seek to force your wife into marriage. They believe you dead. They believe there is no danger in their defiance." A cold fury ignited in Odysseus's chest. "Penelope," he whispered, "has she endured?" "She has resisted them with cunning," Athena said, "with patience, with strength enough to rival your own. But the suitors grow bolder. Her time runs thin." Odysseus clenched his fists. Every part of him longed to storm into his palace and cut down every last intruder. But Athena raised a hand. "Not yet," she said. "You must not reveal yourself until the moment is right." She reached out and touched his forehead. Odysseus felt his body shift bones bending, skin roughening, hair graying. In an instant he became an old beggar, stooped, weathered, unrecognizable. "A disguise," Athena said, "so you may walk among them unseen, so you may learn who is loyal and who is not." Odysseus breathed deeply, adjusting to the strange heaviness of age. The disguise felt like a cloak of humility, a reminder that victory often begins not with glory, but with patience. Athena handed him a staff and a patched cloak. "Go now," she said. "Seek the hut of your loyal swineherd, Eumaeus. He will not fail you." And with a flash of silver light, she vanished. The loyal swineherd. The path to Eumaeus's hut wound through hills and forests Odysseus had once known intimately. Now he walked them as a stranger, his cane tapping the earth, his weary gait steady but slow. Birds flitted through branches. Rabbits darted into the underbrush. He inhaled the scent of thyme and sage carried on the breeze. Every step brought memories. Every memory was tinged with sadness and longing. At last he saw smoke rising from a small stone hut. The sound of pigs snorting and rooting echoed through the air. Dogs barked as he approached, circling him with suspicion, until a familiar voice shouted, "Back! Away from him!" The dogs retreated, and there stood Eumaeus. His hair was streaked with grey. His face was lined from years of labor. But his eyes, warm, honest, loyal, had not changed. He approached the disguised Odysseus and studied him with pity, not hostility. "Come, old man," he said kindly. "Sit by my fire. Rest your bones. You look as though the sea has swallowed you and spat you out again." Odysseus's throat tightened. This man, this humble swineherd, had remained faithful in his absence, tending his flocks, guarding what little remained of his household's wealth, enduring the insults of the suitors, and longing for his master's return. Eumaeus led him inside, and offered food simple fare, but prepared with care. "Eat, stranger," he said. "A beggar must never go hungry in my home. That is the will of Zeus himself. Odysseus accepted gratefully, though every bite brought guilt. This man deserved so much more. They spoke late into the evening. Eumaeus told of the suitors' cruelty, of Penelope's steadfastness, of Telemachus's growing courage. Odysseus listened, heart aching. "Your master," Odysseus said softly, "he will return, I swear it." Eumaeus sighed heavily. "Ah, old man, how I wish to believe you, but hope is a fragile thing. Still, I pray each night that Odysseus yet lives." They slept beneath the same roof that night, the fire fading to embers, and for the first time in years, Odysseus slept in Ithaca. The return of Telemachus. While Odysseus rested, another journey neared its end. Telemachus, now grown tall, bold, and strong, sailed home from Sparta, where he had sought news of his father. Athena had guided him, protected him, whispered courage into his dreams. And though suitors had plotted his ambush, he evaded danger and at last stepped onto Ithacan soil. The gods moved quietly around the edges of fate. Athena led him to Eumaeus's hut. The moment Telemachus saw the old swineherd, they embraced with the affection of family. Eumaeus wept openly, holding the young man's shoulders as though he feared losing him again. Odysseus watched from the shadows, still disguised. His heart beat rapidly, trembling on the brink of recognition, yearning to reveal himself. But he remained silent, studying his son with fierce pride. Telemachus had become a man. Athena appeared once more, unseen by all but Odysseus, and motioned him outside. As soon as Odysseus stepped into the sunlight, she touched him, and his disguise melted away. His limbs straightened, his skin smoothed, his eyes sharpened with the fire of youth and cunning. Telemachus stepped from the hut and froze. The man before him was tall, broad-shouldered, powerful, with familiar eyes that gleamed like polished bronze. "Father," he whispered. Odysseus's voice broke. "My son." Then they embraced long, tight, trembling with years of longing. Tears ran silently down their cheeks. In that moment, the weight of 10 years dissolved. But their reunion, beautiful as it was, could not last in peace. Odysseus pulled back, eyes fierce. "Listen to me," he said. "We must act with caution. The suitors are many. We are 2. Telemachus nodded. "Then we will be clever." Odysseus smiled. He could see his own mind reflected in his son. The beggar returns to his palace. Once again disguised as a beggar, Odysseus made his way toward his palace, guided by the swineherd. Telemachus went ahead, returning openly as the Prince of Ithaca. The suitors welcomed him with forced smiles and false words, hiding their frustration that he had escaped their planned ambush. Odysseus entered the grand hall quietly, and what he saw chilled him. His once noble home was defiled floors littered with bones and wine, servants bullied into submission, suitors lounging in his chairs as though they owned them. They feasted, laughed, threw scraps to the dogs, and shouted orders at the maids. The sight filled him with a cold fury deeper than any he had known. Yet he remained silent, a beggar, invisible, watching. Penelope had not yet seen him. Telemachus met his gaze across the room, briefly, subtly, before resuming his role among the suitors. Their plan demanded patience. Odysseus watched as the suitors mocked him, hurled insults, even struck him. One especially cruel man, Antinous, threw a stool at him, hitting him squarely on the shoulder. Odysseus did not flinch. His time would come. Among the chaos, one figure approached him with compassion. Penelope. Her footsteps were soft, her expression gentle but weary. She studied him with careful eyes still sharp with wisdom and hope. "Stranger," she said, "you are welcome in my home. These halls have forgotten kindness, but I have not." Odysseus bowed deeply, keeping his identity hidden. Her presence nearly broke him. Her voice, her grace, her strength. He longed to tell her everything, but the moment was not yet right. She asked him gently if he had news of her husband, and with a steady voice, Odysseus said, "I have heard he is alive." Penelope closed her eyes, inhaling shakily, clinging to that fragile hope. Then she slipped away into the shadows of the palace. The nightly visit. Later that night, after the suitors had drunk themselves into a stupor and stumbled to their chambers, Penelope summoned the beggar to her side. They sat together by lamplight, the flicker illuminating her face with a warm glow. She asked him again for news. Odysseus, choosing his words, carefully crafted a tale that lifted her spirit without revealing the truth. But Penelope was sharp. She studied him intently, sensing something familiar in his manner, his voice, his presence. "Stranger," she said softly, "there is something about you, something known." Odysseus swallowed hard. She then showed him a garment, a cloak he had once worn, and asked if he recognized it. He described it perfectly. Penelope gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "You speak as though you have seen him." "I have," Odysseus whispered, "and he is close." She wept quietly, covering her face with her hands. Odysseus longed to hold her, to comfort her, to tell her he stood right before her, but patience would win the day. The final test. Penelope revealed her plan. "I will hold a contest tomorrow," she said. "A contest only Odysseus could win. I will ask the suitors to string his bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads lined in a row. Whoever succeeds, I will marry." Odysseus's heart pounded. This was her signal, a secret message only he could understand. He nodded. "Do what you must, my queen." Penelope looked at him, eyes full of unspoken sorrow. Then she rose and disappeared into the darkness. Odysseus sat alone, firelight flickering across his weathered disguise. Tomorrow the suitors would fall, and the king of Ithaca would reclaim his throne. The contest of the bow dawn crept slowly across Ithaca, gilding the palace rooftops with soft gold. A quiet stillness settled over the lands. An expectant hush, like the island itself, held its breath. Only one man walked its halls with lucid purpose. Odysseus, disguised as a beggar, carrying decades of weight inside him like a hidden blade. Today would end it. Today his home would be reclaimed. Today justice would come. He had waited for this moment through storms and starvation, through monstrous perils and divine wrath, through loneliness so vast it could have swallowed him whole. Every mile of wandering had led him back to this morning. The suitors, groggy from their nightly revelry, drifted into the great hall. Servants rushed about preparing food, filling cups, sweeping floors still stained with wine. Their faces were drawn with worry. They knew that chaos would erupt again, that cruelty would follow where the suitors walked. Telemachus entered with controlled calm, his expression unreadable. The prince nodded to the beggar, his father, before taking his seat. The sun struck his bronze hair, and in that brief glint, Odysseus saw everything he had missed. The child he left behind, now a man. Soon Penelope descended the stairs, clothed in a veil of pale linen, her steps slow, graceful, heavy with resolve. Whispers spread instantly. Even after all these years, her presence quieted the hall, as though respect still flickered beneath layers of insolence. She carried a long case wrapped in soft cloth. A hush fell. She spoke clearly, each word cutting through the air like a sharp thread. Suitors, today I set before you a test, the test of Odysseus's bow. Whosoever can string it and shoot an arrow cleanly through 12 axe heads aligned in a row, that man I will marry. Shouts erupted, boasts, laughter, crude promises. They did not understand the gravity of her challenge. They did not know her heart. They did not see Odysseus standing in plain sight. They believed her defeated, but Penelope, in her brilliance, had created the perfect trap. Odysseus lowered his gaze to hide a flicker of admiration and gratitude. The bow of the king. Telemachus set the axes in the ground, their sockets gleaming. The metal doors of the storeroom creaked open, and he brought forth the great bow Odysseus's bow, a masterpiece of polished horn and sinew. The suitors stared with a mixture of excitement and unease. They knew the bow's reputation. Many had seen Odysseus's skill in war, but none truly understood the weapon's strength. They would learn soon enough. As Telemachus set the bow down, Penelope withdrew to her chambers, her eyes lingering on the beggar for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Perhaps she sensed destiny drawing near. Antinous, the most arrogant suitor, stepped forward first. He swaggered to the bow, lifted it confidently, and immediately grimaced. The weapon resisted him like a wild creature. He strained, cursed, braced his foot against it, but the bow would not bend. "I am not warmed up," he muttered, forcing a laugh. The suitors chuckled nervously. Eurymachus tried next, his face red with effort, veins bulging in his neck. But the bow wouldn't budge for him either. One by one, each suitor approached with false bravado and left humiliated. Some blamed the humidity. Some blamed their injuries. Some blamed the bow itself. None blamed their own unworthiness. Throughout the attempts, Odysseus watched silently, hands folded, expression calm. He knew the rhythm of the bow. He knew how it would respond. The weapon was as much a part of him as the blood in his veins. At last, Eurymachus stepped away, rubbing his sore hands. "This bow," he said loudly, "is cursed. No mortal can string it." Telemachus stepped forward. "Then let me try," he said boldly. Gasps rippled through the hall. He lifted the bow. His fingers traced its curve with reverence. He set one end against his foot, pulled, and the bow bent slightly. A murmur spread, but Telemachus stopped suddenly. "Not today," he said lightly, handing the bow to a servant. "I leave it to the elders." A clever move-one Athena whispered into his heart. The suitors relaxed, reassured of their dominance. Then Odysseus stepped forward. The beggar's request. "Honored guests," he said in a quiet voice, "may a poor beggar try his hand? I too wish to know, if strength remains in these old bones." The hall erupted in laughter. Antinous sneered. "Will we next give the bow to a child? To a cripple? To a ghost?" Eurymachus added, "If he fails, he'll snap the string with his brittle fingers." But Telemachus spoke firmly. "This is my father's bow. Ours to give, not yours to deny. Let the old man try. It will do no harm." The room fell grudgingly silent. Odysseus took the bow. His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from emotion. Memories burned within him. Hunts upon Ithaca's slopes, gifts from friends, victories earned by cunning and fate. This bow had slain enemies, defended his people, shaped legends. He ran his finger along the string. It hummed faintly like an old friend whispering, "Welcome home." A servant brought him an arrow. Odysseus inhaled. The hall watched, sneering, smirking, whispering. He placed one end of the bow against the ground. His fingers gripped the curve expertly. He bent the bow with effortless grace, like a harpist tuning strings, and in a smooth motion he strung it. A resounding twang filled the hall. Silence fell, a silence so deep it seemed the earth itself was listening. Then, without hesitation, Odysseus notched the arrow, drew back the string, and released. The arrow flew swift and straight. It cut through the first axe head, then the second, the third, the fourth. All 12 pierced cleanly. The suitors froze eyes wide, mouths open. Their laughter died on their lips. Odysseus straightened. His disguise shimmered in the faint light. His voice, when it came, was strong as bronze. "Now," he said, "is the time for another kind of contest." And he lifted his bow once more. The reckoning chaos erupted. Antinous reached for his sword, but he was too slow. Odysseus loosed another arrow, and it struck the suitor directly in the throat. Antinous crumpled backward into a table, wine spilling like blood across the floorboards. The room exploded in screams. "Madman!" Eurymachus shouted. "You've killed the noblest of us!" Odysseus's gaze hardened. The man was a coward and a parasite, and this is only the beginning. The suitors dashed for the doors, but the doors were locked. Telemachus stood before them, spear in hand. Behind Odysseus, Eumaeus and Philoetius, 2 loyal servants, appeared with shields and additional weapons. They positioned themselves at the doors to prevent escape. The trap had sprung. Panic swept the hall. The suitors overturned tables, grabbed makeshift weapons, shouted threats and pleas. Eurymachus tried to negotiate. "Odysseus, we will repay you. We will return everything we consumed." "Words will not erase years of insult." Odysseus's voice was cold enough to still the air. Eurymachus charged. Odysseus shot him through the heart. After that, battle became a storm. Telemachus fought at his father's side, his spear flashing like lightning. Eumaeus moved with surprising strength. Philoetius guarded the entrance with fierce resolve. Odysseus fought like a force carved from stone. Every arrow found its mark. Every swing of his sword was guided by Athena. The suitors fell one by one, shouting, begging, cursing, until the hall lay littered with bodies. At last, silence returned, a silence heavy with justice. Athena appeared briefly, unseen by all but Odysseus. Her gaze filled with pride. "It is done," she whispered. The faithful and the faithless. When the blood had dried, Odysseus turned to the servants who had remained loyal all these years. He embraced them, promising freedom and reward. Then he summoned the disloyal, those who had mocked him, aided the suitors, betrayed his trust. Their punishment was swift and just. Ithaca would be rebuilt from loyalty, not rot. Telemachus cleaned himself and the weapons, breathing deeply as the weight of violence slowly left him. He looked at his father, awe shining in his eyes. "Father, we did it." Odysseus placed a hand on his shoulder. Together. The reunion. Now only one task remained. Penelope. Odysseus washed the blood from his hands, brushed dust from his clothes, and allowed Athena to restore his appearance. Strength returned to his limbs, youth to his posture, beauty to his face. Not disguising him now, but revealing him fully. When he entered Penelope's chamber, she sat quietly at her loom hands, still, eyes distant. The glow of lamplight enveloped her like a soft halo. A servant approached her. "My queen," she whispered, "the suitors are dead. Your husband has returned." Penelope did not look up. "Bring him to me," she said. Odysseus stepped forward. She stared at him, studying his face, his stance, his eyes. She saw the shape of a young warrior she once knew, buried beneath years of hardship and shadow. But she did not move toward him. She did not cry out in joy. Her wisdom demanded caution. Her heart feared deception. "Stranger," she said finally, "if you are truly my husband, prove it. Tell me something no other man could know." Odysseus's chest tightened. He walked closer, slowly, respectfully. "Your bed," he said quietly. "Our bed. I built it myself from a living olive tree whose roots still hold the earth. No one could move it unless they cut the trunk." Penelope gasped. Her hands trembled. Tears flooded her eyes. Her composure shattered. She rushed into his arms, collapsing against his chest as though 10 years of grief broke free in a single breath. "Odysseus," she sobbed, "my love, my king, you are home." He held her tightly, arms trembling, heart overflowing. "Penelope," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "I have returned. I have come back to you." They stood together, wrapped in the warmth of a love tested by fate and time, stronger than any storm that had tried to tear them apart. At last, reunited, whole, home. Epilogue: The Peace of a King. In the days that followed, Ithaca slowly healed. Families returned to their homes. Servants rebuilt the palace. Odysseus visited his father, Laertes, bringing tears of relief and joy. Peace returned to the island, the kind of peace that feels deep and earned. When Odysseus stood upon the cliffs overlooking the sea, his sea, he felt the winds soft against his face. Not cruel, not vengeful, accepting. He breathed in the salty air and knew that his wandering was done. He was king again, husband again, father again. And though the gods still had one final journey in store for him far in the future, when grey hair overtook him and peace had run its course, today and for many years to come, Odysseus was home.